Hello and welcome to this WION live broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Chris Jones and these are the headlines. Beijing is under lockdown as China battles to contain the rising COVID cases. Schools, restaurants, gyms, salons and other facilities to remain shut for a week on the Chinese capital. The bloody repression of peaceful demonstrations in Iran must end, the UN rights chief insists, as countries discuss launching an investigation into Tehran's deadly crackdown. Ukraine struggles to repair its battered power and water services after Russia targeted the electricity grid with dozens of cruise missiles and temperatures plunged. Moscow issues more than 80,000 Russian passports to residents of 4 Ukrainian territories since President Vladimir Putin claimed to have annexed the regions in September. Now, Beijing is under lockdown. The Chinese capital is the latest to go under severe restrictions as the communist regime tries to contain the latest spike in COVID-19 infections. Malls and shops were shut in the capital city, with authorities imposing localized lockdowns and other curbs. Frustrated Beijing residents shared their struggles. They hope the policy will ease soon.
Only by this way, the easing of the COVID-19 curbs, can people live a normal life. Otherwise, everything's halted. How many people have the savings to support them if things continually stay halted? And even if you have the money to stay at home every day, that's not true living. That's lingering on the last breath of air.
Well, among the regions where curbs have been imposed is the Zhengzhou city. The region has been in the headlines in the last week after hundreds of workers at a Foxconn factory clashed with the police following a hiring incident. Under the new curbs, residents in Zhengzhou cannot leave the area unless they present a negative COVID test, as well as a permission form from local authorities. They've also been advised to not leave their homes unless necessary. China on Wednesday reported its highest ever infection tally since the pandemic began. And the country's National Health Bureau said that they recorded nearly 31,500 local infections. The infections have seen a surge in recent days despite China's draconian zero COVID policies being in place. The numbers are relatively small when compared with China's vast population of 1.4 billion and the caseloads seen in Western countries at the height of the pandemic.
Eventually, it becomes very difficult to suppress the virus. And in the absence of, let's say, immunity in the population provided by prior infection and poor vaccination rates, this is a difficult situation.
The unrelenting zero COVID push has caused fatigue and resentment among the population as the pandemic's third anniversary approaches. China's COVID policy has sparked sporadic protests and hit productivity in the world's second largest economy.
There's a trade-off. And the government needs to decide at one stage, when do we have enough vaccine coverage? When do we think, we can really protect the vulnerable and then allow the virus to circulate? In my mind, there's no other option. You have to allow this virus to circulate. You have to build up some natural immunity whilst protecting those who are vulnerable. And that can only be done with very high vaccine coverage rates.
In the latest from China's Foxconn's labour unrest, Apple's contract manufacturer said Foxconn said a pay-related technical error occurred when hiring new recruits at a COVID-hit iPhone factory in China and apologised to workers after the company was rocked by fresh labour unrest. Reports also add larger protests at Foxconn's flagship iPhone plant in China were under control, and the company continued to communicate with employees engaged in smaller protests. Well, yesterday, hundreds of workers joined protests at Foxconn's major iPhone plant in China's Zhengzhou this week, with some men smashing surveillance cameras and windows. Men smashed surveillance cameras and windows in rare scenes of open dissent in China, sparked by claims of overdue pay and frustration over severe COVID-19 restrictions. Reports add that the largest protest had died down by Thursday, and the company was communicating with employees engaged in smaller protests, a Foxconn source familiar with the matter told Reuters. The Taiwanese company said it would try to solve concerns and meet worker demands with corresponding care subsidies offered to those who want to return to their hometowns. The Zhengzhou plant employs more than 200,000 people to make Apple Inc. devices, including the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. The person said the company had reached initial agreements with employees to resolve the dispute, and production at the plant continued on Thursday. Well, let's go over to the United States now, and the problems for the Republican Party seem unending. In the latest, the US Justice Department is seeking to question former Vice President Mike Pence as witness in the January 6th probe. According to a report by the New York Times, Pence is open to considering the request, as he recognises that the Justice Department's probe is different from the investigation by a House of Representatives committee. According to reports, the discussion about questioning Pence are in their early stages, and up to now, Pence has not been subpoenaed, and the process may even take months, as former President Donald Trump may seek to block or slow his testimony by trying to invoke executive privilege. Pence has already said that Trump was wrong to believe the former vice president had the power to oversee the outcome of the 2020 election. The 2020 election results were being certified by Pence and lawmakers when the Capitol was attacked by supporters of Trump. The former US president cooperating with the investigation would be a landmark development in the case, as Trump has already announced a 2024 presidential campaign. And various reports suggest Pence is also considering a campaign of his own. As you do. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our correspondent, Susan Tehrani. Susan, thanks so much for your time on this. Big trouble, it seems, for the Republican Party at the moment. What more can you tell us?
Well, what's going to be interesting to watch is whether or not Donald Trump would want to get involved and exert executive privilege on this issue. We do know, and this is a quote from the New York Times, that Mr. Trump's efforts to slow or block testimony included asserting executive privilege over testimony of two of Mr. Pence's top aides. Those were Mr. Chief of Staff Mark Short and his General Counsel Greg Jacob. Now, both of these returned for grand jury testimony, but we do know that is something that Donald Trump had in mind for those two individuals, and we'll have to see whether or not he would want the same for Mike Pence or not, and how far he would get into that. And then you also mentioned that Mike Pence has aspirations, at least that's what we think, running for for president in 2024. He hasn't made any announcements yet. Would this really affect that? And then also Donald Trump announcing a 2024 bid if Mike Pence does go and testify at the Justice Department, what implications would that have for the president? But as of now, no subpoena has been issued, so we'll have to wait and see, at least after the holidays. And even if the subpoena is issued, this process does take weeks, if not months.
And you mentioned in passing there are, as you say, reports that Trump could be seen as a losing candidate in the next election. Of course, he's announced that he wants to run for presidency. How much could this situation involving Mike Pence really add to those thoughts?
What's interesting is when investigations like this come up, at least when it's regarding Donald Trump often benefits because he becomes the underdog, the victim. Now, we have to see what the content of this investigation, this subpoena would be, this testimony would be. But every time the Justice Department, the FBI is involved, because nothing substantial, so far at least, has come out of it. We can go back to the Mar-a-Lago issue, his impeachment proceedings, the January 6th committee. Poll after poll, after all of these incidents, it seems Donald Trump comes out on top with the American public because nothing comes out of it, really. So we'll have to wait and see if this is any different, but that's been the case. This might be a little different because it involves the Justice Department and Mike Pence and the certification of elections. And we saw that, at least with the midterms, that the American public really rejected Donald Trump's false claims that the 2020 elections were stolen.
Susan, thanks for your time. That was Susan Teherani reporting for us there on the US issues. Now, staying with the US, and former US Vice President candidate Sarah Palin is projected to have again lost her bid for a comeback. According to various media projections, she suffered her second defeat in 3 months to Mary Peltola, a Democrat, in the race for a US House of Representatives seat in Alaska. However, the results won't affect which parties run Congress after the midterms. Republicans are still set to take over the House while Democrats retain the Senate. But Mary Peltola's victory is a blow to the GOP leader Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans. In August, Peltola made history when she became the first Alaskan native seated in Congress after she won the special election to replace longtime GOP rep Don Young, who died in March at the age of 88. The outcome of the November 8th election for the state's at-large House seats had been delayed for weeks because of Alaska's new ranked choice voting system, where voters rank the candidates in order of preference. As the war in Ukraine escalates, the global weapon industry seems to be booming, and some nations are looking to boost weapon exports. One such nation is South Korea. In the latest, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol vows to step up efforts to boost weapons exports and secure cutting-edge defense technologies. Yoon aims to build the country's weapons industry into the world's fourth largest arms exporter. In May, Yoon hosted a meeting on promoting defence exports for the first time since taking office. The meeting was designed to explore ways to shift the mainstay of the industry to exports from domestic supplies. According to him, the South Korean defence industry is a new future growth engine and the pivot of the high-tech industry. The South Korean president also calls for improving the conditions for research and investment by defence contractors as he aims to build an ecosystem which can grow autonomously. Earlier, South Korea clinched its biggest ever arms deal with Poland, which is estimated to be around $15 billion. That deal excludes exports of tanks and howitzers. A growing number of countries, including Australia and Norway, are also seeking to ramp up defence cooperation. African leaders have declared a ceasefire in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo starting on Friday. The declaration was issued by leaders of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi and Angola and former Kenyan president after a summit in Luanda. The agreement took place at a summit organised by Angola, gathering the members of the East African community. The statement said that the M23 must withdraw from its occupied territories or face intervention by regional forces. The agreement adds that there will be no politico-military support to the M23 and all other local and foreign armed groups in the region. M23 spokesperson is yet to react to the ceasefire. Even in July, the Rwandan president and his Congolese counterpart agreed on an immediate cessation of hostilities and the withdrawal of M23 fighters from Congo. But the M23 did not respect that agreement, arguing that only it could sign a ceasefire agreement with the government. Now, historically, Congolese governments have claimed M23 is supported by the neighbouring country Rwanda. In August, a report by UN experts said they had solid evidence that members of Rwandan forces were conducting operations in Congo in support of the M23 group. Rwanda has repeatedly denied those allegations. Instead, it has accused Congolese forces of carrying out cross-border shelling. Now, keeping our focus on Africa, residents living near one of South Africa's largest coal-fired power stations fear their livelihoods will be at risk if the power station is closed or repurposed. As part of South Africa's transition from coal to cleaner sources of electricity like solar and wind, as one of the world's biggest polluters due to its heavy reliance on coal to produce electricity, South Africa plans to phase out its coal-fired power stations in favour of green energy. It recently secured at least $8.5 billion in funding to repurpose the coal-fired power plants to renewable energy sites producing solar and wind power. The plan to do that has been welcomed and is being funded by Western countries including Germany, US and the UK. The country's first power station to be decommissioned is the Committee power station in Mpumalanga. This power station is being targeted for repurposing it to a solar and wind power generation. Moreover, the town of Masakane, which is located about 2 kilometres from the power station, is home to thousands of residents, with many having migrated from various parts of the country to settle closer to the power station in search of economic opportunities.
Londo leyo ngeke ngayizwa kwafika ubuhlungu kumina cause isikakhulu kusebenza ilahle nabafowethu bakhona abanye abasebenza ngama truck abathutha lona lelahle belisa kulezo ndawo kumele ba lihambe yabo liphehla ugesi manje mangase kuthwala yaphela ilahle kushuthi nathi asisezu khona ukuthi sithathe isinko sisibeke etafuleni emndenini yethu because kusetshenzwa ngalo ilahle njengoba kuye kumalanga wemalahleni ibisethembele kuyilona ilahle ngoba mangizwa nje kuthiwa kuzangena amasolisola ngiyazi mina ukuthi isebenza kanjani.
The primary sources of income for these community members are directly and indirectly linked to coal mining and the 3,600 megawatts power station. The source of income ranges from transportation and food industries to contract work inside the power station. The community still continues to use coal on a daily basis for cooking and heating.
La kulama community labafaka khona amasola la kunemisebenzi khona sebayo strugglisha ngemsebenzi and nawo mabakwenda lokho ababuka ukuthi sometimes sebatawuphakamisa icrime ibe etu kanti uma bangakwendi lokho bakhona ukuncedisa abantu labaphilako enzaweni la kunemisebenzi khona bakhona ukuthi bawavulela amathuba emsebenzi ukuthi basebenze angeke kuze benebugebengu ngoba egcineni bani bogcina sebabulana bodwana because ngenxa yephupho.
But the transition remains a contentious issue. Even within President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet, the energy minister told lawmakers that the transition to cleaner energy should not happen at the cost of people's livelihoods and the country's energy security. Well, let's set up what's in store later this evening. Most have now had their first taste of Qatar 2022, and it's time now for the tournament's perennial favourites to get going. Brazil begin their quest for a record-extending 6th world title when they meet Serbia in a Group G encounter later on. Now, Brazil pretty much always start a World Cup as favourites, but it's been more than 2 decades since the vastly populated South American country last called themselves world champions. Brazil qualified for the Qatar World Cup without losing a single match. They won 14 of the 17 matches they played, scored 35 goals and only conceded 5. They were the first South American nation to book their ticket to the World Cup. And it's fair to say the Samba boys look confident at both ends of the pitch. They've brought 9 forwards to Qatar, and each one of them are first-team regulars. Headlining this array of superstars is Neymar Jr. The 30-year-old is having a stellar season for the French champions Paris Saint-Germain with 12 goals and 12 assists in 20 games. There's also Vinicius Jr., Gabriel Jesus, Rafinha, and so on. The midfield and defence also look compact with Casemiro, Bruno Guimaraes, Fabinho, Thiago Silva, and Marquinhos.
Dreaming is part of being human, and we dream of being able to make a great World Cup and be able to become champions. And if not champions, give our best, because only one team will win the World Cup, and we must have the wisdom of great teams that are on the same level as us. Pressure is inevitable.
Brazil's opponent Serbia in the World Cup finals for the 3rd time as an independent nation, with the likes of Dusan Lajovic, Dusan Tadic and Alexander Mitrovic in their ranks, the latter, of course, having an excellent season in the Premier League thus far for Fulham. The Eagles, as they're known, are ranked 25th in the world, and they had an impressive World Cup qualifying campaign where they remained unbeaten and topped their group ahead of Portugal. Serbia have only lost twice in their last 16 internationals across all competitions. Now, the popular Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade returns for its 96th year. The parade is famous for drawing millions to the streets of New York, enormous balloons to celebrity performers. This parade has pretty much everything. Let's take a look at some preparations.
The balloons can be about 70 feet long. Some of the largest ones are 70 feet long. And the giant balloons take 50 people underneath, just holding lines. We had extra people for support, but we've got at least 50 people holding each one of the giant balloons.
Well, that's all we have time for on this WION Live broadcast. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again very soon.